Nearly 2 decades after Alabama teen Natalee Holloway vanished in Aruba, her mother learned for sure what she always suspected. Natalee was killed by Joran Vandersloot, and today he finally revealed what happened all those years ago.
In a case that haunted headlines for 20 years, the name Natalee Holloway became etched in the collective memory of a generation, synonymous with heartbreak, mystery, and unrelenting hope. But now, after decades of silence and deception, the man long suspected has finally confessed. His chilling admission, buried deep in courtroom transcripts, reveals a truth far more disturbing than anyone imagined. What happened to Natalee? The story has been solved, but the answer may leave you shattered. Stay with us as we uncover the full, devastating truth. What happened to Natalee Holloway on that night in 2005? For nearly 2 decades, the world has clung to the fragments of a haunting mystery, the disappearance of 18-year-old Natalee Holloway in Aruba back in May 2005. Her story became one of the most widely publicized unsolved cases of the century. But now, a disturbing confession by the longtime suspect, Joran Vandersloot, has shattered the silence and revealed details even darker than most had feared.
I see a huge cinder block laying on the beach. I take this and I smash her head in with it.
Filed as part of the U.S. Attorney's sentencing memorandum in 2023, the confession came from a transcript of a recorded FBI interview. In this harrowing document, Joran Vandersloot finally explained in chilling detail how he ended Natalee's life. The admission wasn't part of a murder charge, but it came alongside his guilty plea for wire fraud and extortion involving Natalee's mother, Beth Holloway. As part of the plea deal, he agreed to tell the truth about what happened on that fateful night. According to his statement, after a night out at a local bar in Orangestad, Aruba, Vandersloot and Natalee ended up alone on a beach. It was there, he claimed, that he made an unwanted sexual advance. When Natalee resisted and struck him in the groin, he reacted violently. He admitted to kicking her hard in the face, knocking her unconscious, or possibly worse. As he described it, she stopped moving completely. Just steps away from her still body, he saw a heavy cinder block lying in the sand. Without hesitation, he picked it up and slammed it down onto her head, killing her. "I smashed her head in completely," he confessed, according to the transcript. The investigators asked him to clarify what kind of block it was. He pointed to the standard gray cinder blocks, the same kind used in the nearby buildings. What followed is perhaps just as grim. With her lifeless body on the beach, Vandersloot claimed he dragged Natalee's body down toward the ocean. The waves were calm that night. He walked into the surf, up to his knees, and pushed her body out into the dark water, hoping the tide would take her away. Then, he said, he walked back home like nothing had happened. This horrifying confession was not only specific, but consistent with elements that had long been speculated. And to ensure it wasn't another of his many lies, the FBI administered a polygraph test. He passed. By Bureau standards, he was finally telling the truth. Federal prosecutors, including Assistant U.S. Attorney Lloyd People, acknowledged the weight of this confession. People described it as the closest thing we'll ever get to the truth about Natalee's fate. To corroborate parts of Vandersloot's statement, investigators even revisited the Aruban coastline, comparing the environment he described to the real location. Still, despite this shocking revelation, one question haunts the case. Where is Natalee Holloway's body? How could one confession, buried for 18 years, reveal something darker than anyone imagined? Stay with us to find out. The lies, the manipulation, and the long road to a chilling confession. From the moment Natalee Holloway vanished on May 30th, 2005, the spotlight zeroed in on one name, Joran Vandersloot. The 18-year-old from Mountain Brook, Alabama, was in Aruba on a senior class trip. celebrating graduation with her classmates. That night, she was last seen leaving a popular nightclub with Vandersloot, then just 17. She never made it back to her hotel. What followed would become one of the most confounding and painful unsolved cases in recent memory. Almost instantly, Vandersloot's story began to shift. First, he claimed he and two friends had dropped Natalee off safely at her hotel. Then, without explanation, he changed his account, saying he had left her alone on the beach. As media attention exploded and police pressed for answers, these inconsistencies raised red flags. But despite intense public scrutiny, multiple searches across the island, and repeated interrogations, no concrete evidence surfaced. No body, no witness, no confession. In the years that followed, Vandersloot never faded from public view. If anything, he seemed to lean into the attention. He gave interviews, leaked tips, and made dramatic claims, only to retract them later. In 2008, Dutch crime journalist Peter R. de Vries secretly recorded him in a car, seemingly confessing that Natalee had died while they were together and that he had disposed of her body. But when confronted, Vandersloot denied everything. He insisted the recording was a setup, a performance he had staged to impress someone he believed was connected to the drug world. This behavior became his trademark. One moment, he offered answers. The next, he pulled them back, twisting the truth like a weapon. His manipulative streak grew even more disturbing in 2010, when he contacted Natalee's mother, Beth Holloway, with a cruel offer. In exchange for $250,000, he would reveal where Natalee's remains could be found. After receiving a $25,000 advance, he led her legal team to a building site, which turned out to be a dead end. That act, an extortion attempt wrapped in false hope, resulted in federal charges in the United States, but the real turning point didn't come until October 2023, nearly 20 years after Natalee vanished, extradited from Peru, where he was already serving time for the murder of another woman. Vandersloot entered a plea deal with U.S. prosecutors. This time, he gave a full confession to the FBI. It was unlike his previous lies. According to his signed statement, he admitted to attempting to sexually assault Natalee. When she fought back, he reacted with shocking violence, kicking her, knocking her unconscious, then using a nearby cinder block to end her life. He later dragged her body into the ocean. This wasn't just another story. It was a sworn account, backed by a polygraph test, and treated as credible by authorities. For the first time, there was something solid, something final. But the way he told it, cold, calculated, without a hint of remorse, revealed not just a killer, but a manipulator who had held on to the truth like a trophy. For nearly 20 years he lied, but why confess now, and in such chilling detail? Don't go anywhere. The arrests, the shifting stories, and a search that never slept. On June 5, 2005, just days after Natalee Holloway vanished during her high school graduation trip to Aruba, local police made their first major move. Two former security guards, Nick John and Abraham Jones, were taken into custody on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. The pair had once worked at the Allegro Hotel, now shut for renovations, and while authorities never fully explained why they were arrested, whispers suggested that statements from Joran Vandersloot and the Kalpoe brothers had pointed fingers in their direction. The media speculated further, noting that the two men had reputations for hanging around hotels to meet women, and at least one of them had a past run-in with the law. But the evidence wasn't enough. After more than a week in custody, the men were released on June 13th, never charged, never tied conclusively to the crime. Just days before the guards were released, on June 9th, Joran Vandersloot and his friends Deepak and Satish Kalpoe were arrested. From early on, Deputy Police Chief Gerald Dompig had viewed them as the investigation's primary suspects. Phone records were pulled, emails monitored, and surveillance began just 3 days after Natalee was reported missing. But Dompig later admitted something troubling. Pressure from Natalee's family had forced their hand. The arrests, he said, came before they had gathered enough solid evidence. 2 days later, confusion only deepened. On June 11th, a government spokesperson wrongly declared Natalee dead, stating that authorities knew where her body was. Hours later, that claim was walked back. That same evening, Dompig gave a more cryptic update. One of the suspects had admitted that something bad had happened after taking Natalee to the beach. But the next day, prosecutors offered no confirmation, only that the investigation was entering a critical phase. More arrests followed. On June 17th, a local DJ named Steve Gregory Crows was detained after being named by one of the suspects. Just days later, on June 22nd, Joran's father, Paulus van der Sloot, was also brought in for questioning. Both were released on June 26th. Meanwhile, the stories from Joran and the Kalpoe brothers began to unravel, each version more confusing than the last. At first, they all claimed to have dropped Natalee at the beach near the Marriott Hotel. Joran later changed his version multiple times, once saying he left her there alone, another time saying she was with the Kalpoes when he was dropped off at home. Police rejected the latter version outright. Dompig believed the beach story was closest to the truth. Still, with no body, no physical evidence, and a chain of constantly changing accounts, the case dragged on. Even advanced tools didn't help. On July 4th, F-16 jets from the Dutch Air Force flew over Aruba using infrared sensors to detect disturbances in the soil. They found nothing. Not then, and not in the months that followed. She vanished without a trace. But what exactly happened on that beach? The brutal truth Joran finally confessed will shock you. What we know and what remains hidden. 18-year-old Natalee Holloway vanished on the final night of her graduation trip to Aruba in May 2005. For years, her disappearance haunted not just her family and friends, but the entire world. Rumors swirled, investigations dragged on, and yet the truth stayed buried until 2023, when the man at the center of the mystery, Joran van der Sloot, finally revealed what really happened. And what he said was far more disturbing than anyone had feared. This wasn't the first time van der Sloot had spoken about that night, but it was the first time authorities believed him. Unlike his previous confessions, this 2023 statement was part of a formal plea deal, and the details matched long-held suspicions. His account lined up with the earliest theories investigators had, theories that had been drowned out by years of deceit, staged interviews, and false leads. For nearly 2 decades, Natalee's parents lived in a cruel limbo. Their daughter was gone, but they had no answers. They chased every tip, every new version of the story that van der Sloot offered, no matter how unbelievable. He once even tried to sell Natalee's mother false information about her daughter's remains, demanding thousands of dollars for a location that led nowhere. His lies weren't just harmful, they were a weapon used to torment those desperate for the truth. Despite countless searches in landfills, ponds, beaches, and sand dunes, not a trace of Natalee's body was ever recovered. Divers scoured the ocean, cadaver dogs swept potential burial sites, and advanced technology, including infrared-equipped jets and satellite imaging, was deployed. The FBI analyzed duct tape and strands of blonde hair. All these efforts led to nothing. Now, with van der Sloot's confession, a clearer picture has finally emerged. But the cruelest truth may be that the ocean swallowed all evidence long ago. According to him, Natalee's body was left in the water just hours after her death. And after nearly 20 years of tides, storms, and shifting currents, experts agree the chances of recovery are slim. This isn't just a story of one terrible crime. It's a story of manipulation, of a young woman's life stolen in an instant, and of a family who fought for truth through decades of pain and deception. Even as the full truth surfaced, it came with a painful realization. Justice, in this case, may never look the way anyone hoped. What did the world say after Natalee's brutal death, and how did her parents survive the heartbreak? Stay with us to find out. A mother's fury, a nation's firestorm. When terrible incident happened on the Caribbean island of Aruba, the eyes of the world quickly turned to the island's police force and to her heartbroken mother, Beth Twitty. What followed wasn't just a criminal investigation. It became a deeply emotional and often bitter struggle between grief-stricken parents, Aruban officials, and the global media. From the very start, the Twitty family expressed sharp criticism toward Aruban authorities, accusing them of dragging their feet. They believed vital leads were missed, suspects were mishandled, and transparency was lacking. But Beth Twitty's own actions on the island also stirred controversy. Some accused her of pushing a one-sided narrative. Critics claimed she discouraged Natalee's classmates from fully cooperating with investigators, allegedly to avoid any detail that might paint her daughter in an unflattering light. The Twittys denied such claims, insisting their focus was only on getting the truth. Beth didn't hold back when speaking about suspects. She publicly named Joran van der Sloot and the Kalpoe brothers as the people she believed were involved in her daughter's disappearance. On July 5, 2005, after the Kalpoe brothers were briefly released from jail, she labeled them criminals and declared that they had participated in a violent crime against Natalee. That same day, hundreds of Arubans gathered outside the courthouse in Oranjestad, waving signs that read, "Innocent until proven guilty," and "Respect our Dutch laws or go home." The backlash was swift. Satish Kalpoe's lawyer threatened legal action, calling Beth's statements outrageous and libelous. Beth later apologized to the people of Aruba, explaining that her words came from deep pain and frustration. But Beth Twitty didn't back down. In 2007, she published her book, Loving Natalee, a raw and emotional account of her journey. That year, she also appeared on Nancy Grace, again voicing her belief that Joran and the Kalpoes were responsible. In her view, giving up meant Natalee's case would be forgotten. When a Dutch TV special aired hidden camera footage showing van der Sloot allegedly admitting involvement, Beth called the video damning and said it confirmed her fears. She even suggested that her daughter might have still been alive when Joran discarded her body into the sea. She accused Joran's father, Paulus van der Sloot, of helping cover up the crime. Angered by what they saw as systemic failures, the Holloway family eventually shifted their stance on tourism. By September 2005, Beth publicly called for a boycott of Aruba and Dutch territories. Alabama Governor Bob Riley stood beside her at a press conference on November 8, urging Americans to avoid Aruba. Though some U.S. governors and lawmakers echoed the call, others declined. Aruban officials, led by Prime Minister Nelson Oduber, hit back, calling the boycott irresponsible and preposterous. In defense, Aruba's tourism sector launched a full-scale campaign to rebuild its image, forming the Aruba Strategic Communications Task Force to speak on national TV and challenge negative portrayals. But beneath it all, politics, protests, and press, the ache of a mother searching for her daughter never faded. Whispers, backlash, and headlines. Was Natalee's mother unfairly portrayed by the media? Stay with us as the truth unfolds. How the disappearance of Natalee Holloway captivated the world. Within days, what began as a deeply personal tragedy for one Alabama family erupted into one of the most sensational missing persons cases of the 21st century, thanks largely to the relentless grip of the media. Almost overnight, Natalee's face was everywhere. Her smile filled television screens, newspapers, and magazine covers across the United States. Networks like CNN, Fox News, and Microsoft and the National Broadcasting Corporation ran nearly non-stop coverage. From morning shows to late-night broadcasts, anchors recounted her story with growing urgency. Cable news channels transformed the search for Natalee into a daily feature, complete with expert panels, breaking news updates, and live shots from Aruba's beaches. Her disappearance had all the elements the media craved. A young, blonde, attractive high school graduate on a celebratory trip to an exotic Caribbean island. Gone without a trace. The public couldn't look away, and the media wouldn't let them. Beth Holloway, Natalee's mother, became the emotional anchor of the story. With determination in her voice and pain in her eyes, she became a constant figure on television screens. She flew to Aruba immediately after her daughter was reported missing and quickly took control of the narrative, speaking directly to the press, pleading for help and demanding answers from local authorities. Her appearances on shows like The Today Show, Larry King Live, and Nancy Grace gave the search for Natalee a deeply personal edge. Viewers across America were drawn into the heartbreak and the hope that Beth represented. But as the coverage intensified, so did the complications. While the media frenzy kept pressure on Aruban investigators and ensured the case wasn't forgotten, it also triggered a wave of criticism. Journalists and media watchdogs began pointing out that Natalee's case was receiving far more attention than most missing persons, especially those involving people of color or victims from less privileged backgrounds. The phrase, missing white woman syndrome, gained widespread use during this period, drawing attention to how race, class, and appearance influenced which victims the media chose to spotlight. Back in Aruba, the growing media circus caused tension. At first, many on the island were sympathetic and hopeful the attention would bring answers. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, frustration set in. News reports often painted Aruban police as slow, disorganized, or even corrupt, an image many locals and officials felt was both unfair and harmful. Tourism dropped, and resentment grew. What began as a humanitarian spotlight started to feel like a relentless invasion. Joran van der Sloot, the last person seen with Natalee, was thrust into the public eye, portrayed by many outlets as the prime suspect and media villain. With each interview he gave, each new twist, confession, or denial, he reignited interest in the case. Even though much of what he said lacked verification, every word he uttered made headlines. He became a central figure not only in the investigation, but also in the spectacle surrounding it. The drama of the case began to blur the lines between fact and fiction, truth and ratings. As time passed, the focus shifted. The media started scrutinizing the investigation itself more than the disappearance. Even the smallest developments were reported as massive updates. A new witness, a retracted statement, a supposed tip-off. Anything was enough to bring cameras back to the island. And each time van der Sloot re-entered the news, whether for further legal trouble or another twisted tale, the media pounced. In 2010, when van der Sloot was arrested in Peru for the murder of Stephanie Flores, the spotlight returned with full force. Then again, in 2023, when he was extradited to the United States and finally confessed to killing Natalee, it all came rushing back. The case was reignited, once more dominating headlines. The press rolled out specials, retrospectives, and investigative documentaries. True crime programs, podcasts, and streaming platforms dedicated hours to dissecting every angle. Programs like Dateline NBC, 2020 and Netflix docuseries revisited the story repeatedly. With fresh interviews and archived footage, they tried to reconstruct what happened in Aruba on that final night. But by then, the Holloway case had become more than a crime. It was a media landmark. It changed how missing person stories were covered. It raised difficult questions about bias, ethics, and the responsibilities of the press. The coverage had helped keep Natalee's name alive. It pushed authorities to continue the investigation and amplified her mother's cries for justice. But it also exposed the flaws of sensational journalism, the rush to judgment, the lack of accountability, and the tendency to exploit pain for ratings. What was once a desperate search for a missing girl had, over time, become a story the media simply couldn't quit. And even years later, the silence never truly came. Every time Joran van der Sloot made headlines, whether for a new confession, another arrest, or fresh legal action, the story of Natalee Holloway was pulled back into the spotlight. Her name still stirs emotion, still sparks debate, and still commands attention across the globe. What happened in 2005 has refused to fade, echoing through news cycles and public memory to this day. So what kind of judgment do you think Joran van der Sloot deserved? We would like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.